Get ready for an inspiring journey with a real-life superhero, Shona Hirons. Despite challenges like burnout, a near-fatal accident, and cancer, she has emerged stronger each and every time. Shona's stress and burnout experiences even led to an early menopause, which presented its own challenges. Join me in this intimate conversation as we explore Shona's amazing story, from overcoming adversity to guiding others to find their resilience and fulfillment. Hey there. Welcome to the Burnout Isn't Necessary podcast, where we delve into the world of stress, burnout, and the science behind it all. Over a decade ago, I faced burnout as a management consultant, experiencing an emptiness that I wouldn't wish on anyone. But here's the truth. My burnout wasn't necessary, and it's not necessary for you either. I'm Hannah Holden, and together with my amazing guests, we share our real-life experiences with stress and burnout. We explore the science behind stress, offering practical tips to help you navigate those challenging moments in life. Our goal? To empower you to prevent burnout from taking over your life. I am passionate about stress mastery and preventing burnout, and I am here to guide you to a more balanced, fulfilling life. So let's go. Burnout isn't necessary, and I'm here to show you why. Hello and welcome. Welcome to Shona. I should have asked you before we started how to pronounce your surname. I'll ask you that in a moment. Shona and I met last year. We were both at an event talking about burnout and stress, and Shona had some personal experience in burnout and also professional experience helping other people who are going through burnout. And so I thought that it would be great to get Shona onto the podcast to share some of her wisdom with us. So welcome, Shona.
Thanks very much, Hannah. That's really kind of you, and I'm looking forward to it.
So let's start by, if you could just introduce yourself a little, give us a bit of background on who you are and what you do.
Okay, so my name is Shona Hirons, and I am nearly 50. And I guess going back to I call it now my former life. So I spent 20 years working as a lawyer in the corporate world, specializing in many different areas of law, mainly employment, consumer, anything contentious, really. I quite liked a good argument. So contentious litigation. And it wasn't all bad. It was quite good in my 20s and early 30s. The culture where I worked was pretty good. I'd been with the same company for about 14 years. So, I had lots of friends there as well. And throughout my 20s, I was told that due to, they didn't know what had caused it at the time, but I was told I couldn't have children. So I kind of threw myself into my career. So I didn't mind working sort of late some evenings. I wouldn't give up my weekends, though. My weekends were mine. And I felt like I had that work-life balance. And then when I was 32, we discovered that I was born very prematurely, and I was born with a hole in my heart. And it was that, basically, long story short, I had the hole closed, and within 8 months or so, I was able to come off all the medication, which prevented me from being able to have children. And then I fell pregnant with my now 15-year-old daughter. So I guess my life, my priorities around work changed, especially when she reached school age, because she was like my little miracle. And I wanted to be that mum who was at the school gates at least once a week to drop her off and pick her up. It was really important. And at the time, they were going through quite a lot of changes in the organisation I was working for. There was changes in the law we were going to be dealing with. I was the only female in the team and the only person who'd had time off with maternity. Mm-hmm. And when I came back, we had a new manager. And his values, I could tell almost straight away, were very, very different to mine. He would often, and why you could say, why didn't I do anything about it at the time? I didn't. He'd often make comments like, well, my wife's got 4 children and her job is to stay at home and do the cooking, do the cleaning. And he'd make jokes about the fact that she wanted a proper job. And he said, but that is her job. And he would make comments to me like, you should really make a choice of whether you want a career or be a mother. And I felt, why can't we have both? This was 2008, 2009. And over the next couple of years, I felt like partly he made things very, very difficult for me. He'd act all nice to me when we were in a group with other people, but then to my face, he made it clear that he just didn't rate me as a lawyer. And it became really quite toxic very quickly. He took all my responsibilities away from me. He would literally stand behind my shoulder, even though I'd been practicing for 14 or so years by this point, and he'd be going, that's wrong, that's wrong, that's not right, that's not right. And it was so intimidating. And I'd find myself, even though I'd put in a request for flexible working, and I was supposed to have Wednesdays off to do the school run, have some time at home, pick my daughter up, I'd come in on a Thursday and I'd still have the same targets as all the full-timers. And I'd come into work on a Thursday and literally my entire files would be almost up to the ceiling. And it went from supposedly working a 28-hour week to working 80 hours a week. And I was getting into the office earlier and earlier. I was getting in for like 5:30, and I'd have an hour to travel each way as well. I wasn't getting home from work until gone 11. And I would literally sit at my desk all day, without taking breaks, eat the wrong foods. I'd be snacking off stuff from the vending machine, drinking coffee after coffee. And it changed me. I've always been this really active person and really into my health and fitness. And I lost all that. And I fell out of love with myself. I stopped going out with friends, and I'd even go a whole week some weeks without washing my hair because there just wasn't time. And then I mean, I won't go into all the details at the moment because I'm sure you've got some questions, but that was kind of the start of what I now understand was burnout.
Yeah. And so, well, my question was going to be about your burnout experience. So, yeah, I think you've set the scene. And I can see that he's got this limiting belief that women can either be mothers or have a career, and he's kind of forcing that on you by the sounds of what you've described so far.
Yeah, and I mean, burnout, I now understand, it's one of those things that can just creep up on you really, really quickly. And I'd say in the space of maybe 18 months, I went from being this really confident person to someone who'd hardly even speak anymore. I'd have very closed body language. And I felt like, I'd have to work harder and harder and stay longer. And, it started off with like my 28-hour week went up to 40. And then the 40 hours went up to 50. And part of that was the pressure that I had from my manager, who would say, well, you've got targets to meet and you're behind. And if you don't reach them by the end of the year, then you'll be on a performance improvement plan. So, I was just trying to keep on top of it all and taking on new work. It just became impossible. And you weren't allowed to bring work home, so you had to stay in the office. And I think that the more I tried to push myself, the more I neglected my needs and the slower it made me, because I would sometimes be sat at my desk and I could read the same line 50 times and I wouldn't be able to tell you what it said. And then you start panicking. And I think it was around about the beginning of 2013, I started getting strange physical symptoms as well. So as I was getting to the office, I would get this intense burning feeling in my feet. And it was quite painful. It was like they were in a bunch of stinging nettles. And then my hands would start off, I'd get tingling in my fingers. And then they would go literally completely paralyzed and they would claw in on me. And to start, it was just one hand. And then after about 6 months, it started doing it with both hands. And I'd be completely paralyzed for, sometimes it would be 20 minutes, but on the worst occasion, it was 2 days. And I was actually on my honeymoon when it happened when it happened with both hands for a couple of days. And I'd actually stopped. I'd relaxed. I was having a good time. And I think it was my body's way of just going, stop, slow down. And it was horrible. And then I felt so exhausted for ages after. And I think it all started when I had a client that I'd been working with for about 9 months, and we were at the point of settling his case. It was an employment case, and we'd done all the exchange of documents with the other side. And this particular client, he would not answer his phone from our work numbers because they were withheld. And I'm a bit like that. I don't like answering withheld calls. So, but he'd say, look, if you need to call me, then just send me an email. Just say, hey, will you give me a call? And I'll call you straight back. So that's on this one day, we'd had an offer in from ACAS, which are the conciliators, to settle his case. And I needed to speak to him quite soon. So I sent him an email, and the emails weren't auto-generated either. You had to plot it in each time on the system where I worked. And I missed a digit out of the email address. And I get an email back about 2 hours later from the wrong person going, hi, my name is Steve, but I don't think I'm the Steve that you're looking for. But if you're blonde, 25 and sexy as you know what, he said, please feel free to give me a call. And at first I thought that was quite funny. And then I realized, I've breached data protection, and the company took that really seriously. So I thought, right, I better just let my boss know that I've had this email, but, have a look at my file. Everything's there. There was nothing confidential sent to this person. So at first he said, oh, yeah, that's okay. And then when I came into work the next day, I literally got handed a letter, and the security guards had to come up and they had to escort me out of the premises. I was being suspended and I wasn't allowed to talk to anyone. I wasn't allowed to turn my machine on. I was reported to my professional body for potential gross misconduct. And I was sent home and told that they were going to get somebody in to investigate my file to see if I knew this wrong Steve, the wrong person who replied. And even if I was in an inappropriate relationship with him, it was ridiculous. But that at the time, I thought, oh my God, I'm going to lose my whole career. And all I did was send an email to the wrong person. And I was like, maybe a slap on the wrist, but all this. And that was when I had my first panic attack. And I'd never had a panic attack before. And I actually thought I was dying. And, my heart rate was all over the place. I'd only had heart surgery a couple of years earlier, so I didn't know if it was connected, and it was really scary, and I couldn't breathe properly, and the tears were flooding down my face. But I couldn't tell anyone. I felt so stupid. I just didn't understand it. And then they were coming on fast and frequent. And I did go to see a GP on one occasion. But when you have a 10-minute GP appointment and you're trying to explain your symptoms, but you don't really understand it yourself, and they're looking at their watch, he ended up saying to me, I just needed to pull myself together. And I honestly, I left that doctor's surgery feeling so pathetic, and I sat in the car and just sobbed all the way home. I just felt not listened to. So I just carried on, and I just kept on pushing myself. And I just felt completely empty inside.
Did you know that it was a panic attack? And did you so you just had this experience? And I've spoken to other people who've had panic attacks who have described it as being like having a heart attack, because it's the pain in your chest. And so you thought you were going with potentially a heart condition, and you were told to pull yourself together and go home.
Yeah. I had I didn't know anybody else who had panic attacks. Nobody really ever talked about that sort of stuff. And I didn't know how to, if I told anybody at work, I thought, I would just be put onto some sort of disciplinary even more. And I was already on my, the result of that suspension, I ended up getting a final written warning. And I remember my manager saying to me, you need to remember in this world that we're not humans, we're robots, and we cannot make mistakes. And I now feel incredibly sorry for him if that's the way he lives his life, and anyone around him, because we are humans and we do make mistakes. But that pressure at the time was so much. And this was now in 2013. And it ended up, I'd gone to my sister-in-law's with my husband, and she lives in Salcombe in Devon. And it was like the first time, I don't know, I'd been away from home or even gone anywhere for about a year and a half. And we had a really lovely evening. And, and then I woke up on the Saturday morning, and I wasn't hungover because I hadn't had a lot to drink. But I think, again, because I'd stopped, my body had stopped, and I slowed down for once, I ended up losing all the feeling in my left arm, my whole body, my face drooped. I soiled myself. I had no control of my bowels. My hands went in on themselves again like that. And it was so, so frightening. And they called an ambulance, and the nearest hospital was Derriford in Plymouth, which was an hour away. I got blue lighted to hospital, and I can honestly say I have never felt so unwell in my entire life. And everyone was trying to keep me awake and like blow air into my face because all I wanted to do is just sleep. And they checked my blood gases in the ambulance, and I hadn't had a heart attack, so it wasn't that. And then when I got to hospital, I had bloods, and they did an MRI scan, either an MRI or a CT, I can't remember. And after about 5 hours, the doctors came out and said, well, we've got good news. Your test results are normal. There's nothing wrong with you. And I remember thinking, like, that doesn't feel like good news because I feel so unwell. I know what happened to me. You don't just go and, excuse my language, shit yourself. That I didn't even admit that to anyone for years because I was so ashamed. But there was something not right with me. I was not well. And they sent me home, and it took every ounce of energy for me just to get up the stairs and crawl into bed. And I stayed there for 3 weeks. And I lost all my confidence. And then I felt under pressure to go back to work because there was nothing wrong with me. And when I did, that was kind of, I knew that was I couldn't do this anymore. It was killing me. It was ruining my relationship with my husband. It was like a domino effect. My daughter, I'd lost friends because they stopped asking me if I wanted to go out anymore. And I'd always have an excuse, which was normally quite true. But yeah, it was horrible. And I would say that I was probably deeply depressed. I would cry every night when I got in from work. I'd be sick every morning before I'd go in.
With anxiety?
Yeah. And if I look at pictures of myself now, and that was 10 years ago, just over 10 years ago, I look older then than I do now. And it got to the end of 2013, and I was so broken that I just thought, I cannot come back here again. And I left with no job to go to, and I just had to get out of there. And I honestly do think that if I hadn't gone, I wouldn't be here today.
So that sounds like it's far more extreme set of symptoms that you've described than I had in my burnout. Have you met others who have a similar set of symptoms that has been caused by burnout? And my other question would be, when did you come to realize that was all to do with burnout? So that the medics are telling you you're normal. So how did you go from that to figuring out that actually it was the root cause was burnout?
I mean, first of all, when I walked out of there in December 2013, and I had no job to go to, the first thing I thought I need to do is start finding me again. And I thought, well, I'd always been massively into my health and fitness, so I started going back to the gym, and I started realizing, wow, I feel really good. I feel happy when I've had a workout. That was my way of decompressing. We've all got different things that work for us, but that was my thing. And then there was a guy in the gym who was opening up his own studio, and he said, look, I'd love you. He said, your energy's brilliant. He said, I'd love you to come and work with me, and I'll pay for all your training. So we started off with training as a spin instructor, and then I did all my PT qualifications then over the next couple of years. And at first I thought, there's no way. I mean, my confidence was still so low. The thought of sitting on that bike at the front of the studio with a room full of strangers, there was no way I could do that. So it was, the first class I taught was actually February 2014, and I'd been qualified for a couple of months, shadowed a few classes, and I just could see the buzz that everyone was getting. And so I ended up teaching my classes, and I loved it. And you know, I think first of all, it was letting go of that imposter syndrome as well, of like, well, why would anyone, I was 39 at the time, why would anyone want someone who's nearly 40, you know, instructing their class or teaching them how to do exercise? But now I realize, and I'm 50 this year and I still teach, is like people actually look up to you. They think, wow, yeah, you know, you understand it. You understand that actually it's not all about going really, really fast, or, you know, if you're lifting weights, it's more about, you know, taking your time and stuff like that. So that was really, really important to me. And then I also, that wasn't going to be my main job. So I needed to start again, like thinking, right, how am I going to bring the money in? What am I going to do? And I found a job close to home, which was kind of, it was still in law, but it wasn't as anywhere near high pace as what I had been doing for many years. So I got a job there, and it was mainly just more admin-y, management based. And after 6 months, I started to really get my confidence back. But I would say I'd gone from being burnt out to bored out, if that makes any sense. Like I quite like a challenge. I quite like a bit of stress in my life. Now I was just like, you know, every day was the same. And I would still get to a Friday and still not look forward to Mondays, because the job was just mundane and boring. But yeah, I think it was the fitness side and everything else which made me realize. And I started as well doing lots and lots and lots of research and personal development, and started doing some professional development qualifications as well. And the more people I spoke to, I'd realized that what I had was this. Now it's not a buzzword, but burnout. And I mean, during that time as well, I was also going for other medical appointments to rule out anything else sinister. And I was diagnosed with fibromyalgia, which is apparently something where, you know, if you've got lots of pains in joints and, you know, more so in your neck. I didn't really have pain in my neck, but with my hands clawing in and stuff. So I was diagnosed with fibromyalgia and put on medication to help with that, and told there was no cure. But once I started changing my lifestyle, going to the gym, eating properly, managing my stress, taking a job that was nowhere near as demanding, the panic attacks disappeared. The clawing of my hands started to disappear. My feet wouldn't burn. And I started to recognize the triggers and make sure I had a way of interrupting that cycle. So, but that took time. It took a long time to find that.
So effectively, you worked on making yourself better, and then from a position of better wellness, you were able to reflect back on the symptoms and what was causing, you know, the cause of, like you say, the hands. And so then you were able to spot that it was burnout, and it was only in retrospect that you really understood what you'd been through.
Yeah, pretty much. And like, you know, no, if you ask me if I got any help, no, not at that stage. I didn't get any help. And I kind of wish I had, but I almost wish I had someone in my corner to help me figure that out. Because, you know, when I talk to people now, I get them to recognize the obvious behavior changes in others. So even if you're not struggling with burnout, there may be someone in your team or, you know, a loved one who might be showing those obvious signs. It could be that, you know, they've started to be more tired, or they're phoning in sick more, or they just look withdrawn and they've gone a bit quieter. These things, it's not about just putting someone on a performance improvement plan. It's about actually listening. And if you can't help them, signpost them to someone who can.
I think it's interesting that both you and I experienced burnout. 2013 was mine, and like yours was more or less the same. And so the awareness of burnout would have been the same. I had no idea. And it's only in retrospect that I was able to look at all of those symptoms and look at the situation I'd been in leading up to it, and really now understanding the bigger picture. But I think that's why you and I are here, right? Having this conversation, because we've both
so important.
But also inspired, like negatively impacted, but also inspired to share our stories, to raise awareness. And so hopefully somebody who's experiencing burnout today, the conversation, we're here having the conversation. So hopefully.
I don't know about you as well, Hannah, but I think I lived in victim mode for a long time. And, although, burnout's described as chronic stress resulting from, your work and your workplace. But there can be other things as well, and they can all add up. So, I had other things going on in my personal life as well, which, we were having trouble with at the time we were renting, we were having trouble with a landlady who was just horrendous. And, so there was that added stress. My mum was very unwell. She'd had a serious accident and wasn't expected to survive and stuff. And I think, all in turn, it was just like too much. And, I went from being this confident person to being someone who was so overwhelmed, and I'd catastrophize everything. And it was, I look back now and I think, gosh, anyone who knew me then, I'm a completely different person now.
Yeah, I think you make a good point that whilst the definition of burnout is that it's caused by workplace stress, that it's a natural biological consequence of chronic stress. And frankly, the source can be any, even if the WHO currently recognize it as a workplace thing. So I'm aware that we don't have too much time, but I just wanted to touch on another topic that is interesting to you, Pat, and I know that you're multi-passionate, so you've touched on a few things already. So one is menopause. And in your blog, you mention that you believe that your stress and burnout experience brought on an early menopause. And that triggered me and my scientific analytical mind to go off and dig out a study that followed women and found that those women who had experienced higher levels of stress did have an earlier natural menopause, which that was news to me. So I thought I knew a fair bit about stress and burnout, but that was news. So could you, and I think that I've heard other people talking about how women who are already experiencing menopausal symptoms, it can be so much worse for them if they then have high levels of stress as well. So could you give us some insights into the relationship between stress and menopause, and any tips that you might have for somebody who's in that space?
Yeah, definitely. Again, there's not much talked about on this, and I think it's recognizing changes in your personality, not just your personality, but things like brain fog, forgetting things, feeling hot, etc. And I wish GPs wouldn't just assume that you can't be, you're too young for menopause if you're in your 40s. You get most of the symptoms when you're in perimenopause, which can start with a lot of women in their mid-30s. So, and again, the reason why I think there was a link between my early menopause and my burnout was that although I did go away and looked after myself and got myself back, in 2016, when I was actually feeling quite confident, I was headhunted to work back in the city of Bristol for another really big legal organization, quite a senior role. And at first I didn't think I could do that because it was very close to my old office. And I still have these panic attacks if I went in anywhere near Bristol. So even though I'd done a lot of work on myself, that was still there. So I had to work out again a way of interrupting that cycle and stopping it. So I did take the job, and I was honest with them about what had happened previously. And I had flexible working, so that was all good. And I would deal with that stress by cycling to work every day, which was about a 12-mile trip. And I'd say the first few months in that job were brilliant. I won Employee of the Quarter award, and I started really believing in myself again that I can do this. And then I realized that the one thing I hadn't let go of from the 2013 stuff was I hadn't really set healthy boundaries. I've always been a people pleaser. I always like to say yes to pretty much everything. And I found myself just being given all these new projects, and they were all really exciting stuff. But I was working between here and London, and before I knew it, I was back up to working 60 odd hours a week. And on one occasion, nearly 7 years ago, in February 2017, I, as always, and I think women are probably worse than men at this, where you feel like you've got to do everything all at home as well. So I'd be up early, get my daughter ready for school, making packed lunches, and I'd be rushing about. And on this particular day in February 2017, I don't even remember really what happened, but according to a witness, my bike hit a wet patch on the road, and I went over the handlebars, and my face took the impact, and I ended up being put into an induced coma for 2 weeks. I was wearing a helmet, but the shock of the fall went all the way right through my skull and fractured the base of my skull, broke every bone around my orbital area, completely smashed my cheekbone and my jaw. And then when I came around from the coma, I had major facial reconstructive surgery. And I guess for the first time properly, that made me finally just stop and slow down and question my values, question my why. And, you know, I spent 9 months in and out of hospital having major surgery, and told there'd be things I'd never be able to achieve again. And I tried to go back to work. And that was when I started to experience what I now know as brain fog. I'd be halfway through a conversation with a client and completely forget what I was talking about. And my manager there had a big problem with that. She was like, you know, why do you have to keep on asking people to repeat themselves? When are we going to get the old Shona back? And I didn't know if this was due to the head injuries I'd had a year and a half or so earlier, or something else. It was really, really difficult. I was picking up a prescription one day, and when they ask you what your address is, I couldn't remember my address. I could see where the house was, you know, in my head, but what was the address? No idea. I'd go the wrong direction to work, and just lots of other little things as well. But I did go to a doctor, and they even suggested I had early onset dementia, which was, again, really scary stuff when you're, you know, I was 43, 44. And then also after my accident in 2017, my period stopped completely overnight. And I didn't think much of it at first. And then after about 6 months, I mentioned it to my GP and just said, look, you know, I've not had a period now for a while. And he said, well, look, your body's been through so much trauma and stress. It's probably your body's way of just stopping. I thought, all right, fair enough. And then almost 2 years after, so beginning of 2019, my period started again, but like nothing I'd ever experienced before. It was just like I'd bleed for 12 days. They were heavy. I'd be really bloated. And again, the brain fog was just terrible. I could be also sat at home in, say, January, and it'd be freezing cold outside, and I'm there going, oh my God, can we have the patio doors open? I'm boiling. And my husband would be there with a blanket up to here because he'd be freezing. And by this point, I knew I wanted to focus quite a lot on sort of my nutrition, fitness, keep on adding. So I did an advanced diploma in nutrition and weight management and specialized in over 40s. And all the indicators were that I was in perimenopause. So again, I mentioned it to my GP, and he just ruled that out. I was 44, you're far too young for menopause, and just basically told me to go away. And a few months later, I found out that I had uterine cancer and had to have a total abdominal hysterectomy, which then also properly plunged me fully into menopause. Again, 2019, and there was no talk about this. No one warned you that could happen. The minute I started taking HRT, I remember my husband saying, God, I feel like I've got my wife back. And, you know, I've now gone on and done a lot more work in menopause and understanding it, and knowing like how to manage all the symptoms. And I now I mean, I don't know 100% that it was all linked to the burnout, but I have had consultants say to me, you know, the amount of stress and trauma you've been through over those years, it's very likely that that is what caused your early menopause and maybe even the cancer, but we'll just never really know properly.
No, sure. And are menopausal symptoms exacerbated by stress levels?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Okay.
It's massive. It's got a massive thing. So, you know, when by being able to reduce your stress, if you can really help with a lot of symptoms. Pretty much most of them. Most of the main ones are like the hot flushes, night sweats. It impacts your sleep as well. So obviously, if you're stressed and overwhelmed, it's when you try and, you know, go to sleep at night where everything's just running around your head. And also when you're stressed, you tend to not eat properly. So you either do, in my case, I wouldn't be able to eat. So I was hardly having anything of nutritional value in me. Or you might go the other way and eat the sweet stuff, you know, the maybe even self-medicate with alcohol and drugs. So all of that can have a massive impact on, you know, boosting any menopause symptoms that you might have anyway.
Yeah, and now you have worked with people who are going through burnout and recovering from burnout. You're a burnout coach, right?
Yeah.
And now you're also supporting women who are going through menopause. You're running programs, if I'm right.
Yeah. I mean, okay. I like to work with people just like me, but a few steps behind. And I just wish that I had someone in my corner when I was struggling. One with the burnout, just to sort of go, hey, just stop, just slow down, you know, and help me through that. And I didn't have that. I was just made to feel like it was all in my head. But then with the menopause side of stuff as well, you know, it can be completely life-changing for some women. And there's a lot of talk around menopause now, with a new workplace menopause pledge being rolled out by the government in the spring. And it's all good and well, but it's at risk of becoming another tick box exercise, because, you know, you can't even go to your GP, or very rarely find a GP, if you're under the age of 50 and you're having clear menopause symptoms, who will take you seriously. They'll still tell you you have to have a blood test. No, you don't. You don't have a blood test. It doesn't. You could have a blood test on a Monday morning and it'll give you one result. You could have it done again on a Monday afternoon. It'll give you a different one. So I show women now through a 6-week program how you can have an ultimate menopause makeover, with understanding that every single thing you put into your mouth can affect your symptoms, and there is not a single diet in sight either. So that's even more the bonus.
And so if somebody wanted to find out a bit more, where would they go to connect with you or to find out more about what you do?
I mean, like at the moment, so I haven't updated my website for the menopause stuff yet, because I didn't want to confuse people. But I am on Linktree, and I can provide a Linktree. I've got a little 1-page PDF in there which explains everything about my ultimate menopause makeover, but also my corporate menopause program as well, which I really want to push and roll out and support as many organizations as I can to end the stigma and just make it normal. Because at the end of the day, the way I look at it is, I've actually got a private Facebook group on Facebook called The Joyful Menopause. And some people say, is it possible to have a joyful menopause? Damn right it is. It's a choice, but you don't just have to put up with or think of it as like, oh, well, that's it, you know, it's all downhill from here. It can be the most empowering time of your life. And, you know, for me, yeah, reaching 50 this year, bring it on. I'm not ready to stop yet.
Yeah, and it feels like, because, as you know, if you're reaching 50, I'm not sure exactly how old your kids are, but the kids are like, they're bigger and don't need quite the same level of support. So women who are in that phase have such knowledge and experience that organizations need to know how to keep them, need to know how to support them, because otherwise we've got such a huge resource of expertise that we're not enabling to be in the workforce. So I think you're doing some great stuff there. I wanted to close off by talking about goals, because you've described your big accident with the cycling accident, and how terrible your prognosis was at the time. And I know that you started setting yourself goals, and the big one for you then was to be able to go on a ski holiday. And then you decided to do an Ironman, which was awesome. And so what is it that you're working on now? What's your big goal?
So since this time last year, I've been doing 50 things I've not done before I'm 50. And it was just kind of started off as a bit of fun, but they all had to be things that challenged me a bit, even down to the first thing I did, which was, I think, exactly this time last year, was to do cold water swimming. I'm one of these people that, even in Spain in the summer, I'll dip my toe in the sea and run away and squeal like a pig. And this time last year we climbed Snowdon on one day. And then the second day we found this beautiful, like waterfalls into this deep turquoise pool. And it was 1.8 degrees halfway up Snowdon with snowy peaks. And in my bikini and my bubble hat, I got in, and like even the dog looked at me as if to say, "What the hell are you doing?" So that's something else. I never thought I'd do that, but I can understand now why so many people do these cold water dips and cold water therapy. You feel amazing after. And the last one I did was on New Year's Day, and it was at the top of another mountain, and it was absolutely freezing. Oh my goodness, it was the cold wind air as well, but I still did it, and we have a laugh. So that's one, and I've only got about 5 left, and I've had to make some adjustments on a couple. So the anniversary of my accident is the 21st of Feb. And I signed up last year to climb Kilimanjaro starting on that date. And I was supposed to finish on the day that I was brought out of my coma. And then, so I've done loads of training and really excited for it. And then just before Christmas, the company I'd booked it through cancelled it because they didn't have enough numbers. And it was really important for me to do it on that date, and it was just something really special to me. So what I'm doing instead this year, I will still climb Kilimanjaro, probably next year. Instead, I'm doing so you were supposed to walk every day for 6 hours, obviously up a mountain. I'm going to be doing between the 21st of Feb and the 6th of March, I'm going to be doing a 6 hour a day climbing challenge on the climbing mill in the gym. So I will still reach the height of Everest, but virtually instead of actually there this time.
Wow.
And I think that's the thing with goals, is to make sure that, if you hit a stumbling block, it's not that you give up. You find a way around it and still achieve it.
Yeah. That's a beautiful note to leave it on. There's no need for self-flagellation around here. Just adjust your goal and make sure it's still, doable and exciting. I think that's really inspirational. Thank you so much for joining. Thank you for being part of Burnout Isn't Necessary. Our aim is to assist you in navigating stress and preventing burnout. If you found our conversations valuable, please consider subscribing and taking a moment to rate the podcast. Your feedback is essential. I want to hear from you. If you have questions or ideas for future episodes, share them with me. Your input can shape the content that we create. A common question I receive is where to start in managing stress, and everything starts with awareness. Stress impacts each of us in a unique way, and some stress symptoms can seem a little random, so I've created a checklist of symptoms to help you better understand how stress shows up for you. There's a link in the show notes. And a quick reminder, this podcast is presented for educational and entertainment purposes only. It's not a substitute for professional advice. Stay tuned for more episodes, and until next time, take care of yourself.